The time is just gone 8:35 a.m. and we are now looking at where we are Islamically. The month is Rabiul Thani. In a few days' time, we will be in the month of Rajab. Now, why is this month of Rajab so significant? And particularly when we look at the last 100 years, and this is 100 Hijri years that we are talking about, and this is since the end of the Uthmani Khilafah. Now, this is very, very relevant, particularly in the times that we are living in, and particularly looking at what has happened to the Muslim Ummah since the end of the Khilafah in the last 100 years. And this morning, we joined on the line from the UK, member of Hizb ut-Tahrir in the UK, Mazhar Khan. Brother Mazhar, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and nice to be back on your show.
Yes, Jazakallah khairan to you for joining us. And I know 10 minutes, we're not going to be doing justice to this topic because this is a huge topic. We're talking about 100 years since the end of the Khilafah. And inshallah, next week, we are planning a full webinar to discuss, to have a more comprehensive discussion on the fall of the Khilafah and what it actually meant. But just, obviously looking at where we are at this point in time, and just, I know it's going to be difficult for you to summarize these last 100 years. What have they actually meant for the Muslim Ummah?
In one word, I mean, it wouldn't be overdoing it to say it's been a disaster for the Muslim Ummah. And it's not an exaggeration to say that because of the fall of the Uthmani Khilafah over 100 years ago, Hijri years, that the Muslim Ummah in their own lands, in their own countries, have become refugees and foreigners. So, for example, we've got countries who have become, and the governments who have become countries to their own people. For example, in Egypt, in Syria, the people view their governments as their enemies. If you look in places like Afghanistan, if you look in places like Palestine, Kashmir, Yemen, the Uyghur Muslims, and Muslims around the world who are occupied, who are being oppressed, there is no one they can look to come to their rescue. So Palestine has been going on for the last 7, 8, 9 decades. We can talk about Kashmir, same again. We can talk about what's going on currently with the Uyghur Muslims in China and Muslims, even in Yemen with the current conflicts in Syria and places. Who do they look to? Who do they appeal to come to their rescue? And unfortunately, year after year after year, we've been sold these lies that, we need to go to the international community. But the international community is not there for the Muslims, and it is the international community which brought about the fall of the Khilafah. And this is why it's very important that Muslim Ummah connect with their history. We are not South Africans, we are not British, we are not Americans, we are Muslims, and our history is the Islamic history. So we should know about Rajab. We should know about the 100-year anniversary. We should know our milestones in our history, where we come from and what is significant for us. We find Muslims celebrating the end of the First World War, the Second World War, and other events which are historically significant. But what about the important events which define our current situation? Palestine is connected to the fall of the Uthmani Khilafah, which is intrinsically connected to the fall of the Khilafah. If we look at the political disunity in the Muslim world, if we look at the conflicts and the troubles and the problems afflicting the Muslim world, not just in the Middle East, but in the wider world, it is most of those problems are related to the lack of Islamic political authority, related to the fact of the false nationalities which have arisen, and the creation of sectarianism. And these are things that the enemies of the Muslims used in order to divide the Muslims. So, for example, if you look at the emergence of the Saudi state, which is the only country, as far as I know, in the world named after a tribe or a family. There's no other country in the world named after a tribe or a family. They were funded. The British knew of their opposition to the Uthmani Khilafah. So Britain, whilst it occupied India, used to ship armaments from Mumbai to the port in Kuwait, and they would support and finance the Saudi tribe to fight against the Ottomans. And they inflamed nationalism. So they created and funded the Young Turks movement in Turkey, saying to them, look, you're European, You're not backward Arabs. And at the same time, the Lawrence of Arabia would be in the Middle East working with Sharif Hussein of Mecca and other Arab tribes and telling them, you Arabs, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you the Prophet. Why are you letting Turks rule over you? So they created this asabiyah and movements within the Muslim world in order to incite nationalism and cause division. And that nationalism and division is the thing today keeping the Ummah separate. And the governments are hell-bent on keeping these false borders to keep the Muslim Ummah divided. And Europe came together because of their hatred of Islam, because of the humiliation they faced at the hands of the magnanimous Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, who treated them with great magnanimity and great respect. And when he ended their occupation of Masjid al-Aqsa, it humiliated them. Because when they occupied Jerusalem, they brought bloodshed, pillage, carnage, looting, and destruction. But when Salah ad-Din liberated their land, he did it with so much, with a magnanimous nature that it humiliated the Europeans, because it showed that the Islamic civilization was far superior to their civilization. And they didn't forget that. 673 years later, when they destroyed the Uthmani Khilafah, when they reoccupied Palestine, the French general went to the grave of Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi and kicked it and said, Salah ad-Din, can you hear us? We have come back. So that shows you the enmity they had. And it was a diligent plan that they put in place to bring about the fall of the Khilafah. So there was a book written by Sheikh Abdul Qadim Zaloom entitled How the Khilafah Was Destroyed. And in there, he detailed some detailed events which took place where the Europeans funded missionary movements, where they funded so-called scientific and cultural movements in Beirut, in Cairo, in Istanbul, in order to create opposition to the Uthmani Khilafah from within and to destroy it. And these people surrounded the Muslim Ummah. And as colonialism was taking root, France occupied Egypt. And from Egypt, they tried to weaken the Khilafah state. And it is only because of the disputes between themselves, between the French and the British and the Russians, that it delayed the fall of the Khilafah. And because of the great leadership of Sultan Abdul Hamid, that delayed the fall of the Khilafah. But these people had been planning for hundreds of years. And we need to know this, so we don't fall into the same hole twice, and we don't fall for the same tricks again. And also that we recognize that the European powers and the international community do not have the best interest of Muslim and Islam at their heart. We really need to understand that, and we need to stop looking towards the international community to solve our problems. Our problems exist because of the lack of authority. Our problems can be addressed by bringing back the authority of Islam, which is central to the Islamic deen, which is central to even our ibadah. People don't even know the fiqh of the Khilafah. It is the duty of the Khalifa and his representative to lead the Muslim Ummah into Arafat on the day of Hajj. It is the duty of the Sultan and the Khalifa to appoint the Khatibs of the Jummah khutbahs in the main masajids. Our deen is intrinsically linked with our political authority and even our ritual practices. Even the collection and distribution of zakat is linked to the Baytul Mal. So even our day-to-day practices of Islam, like zakat, like Jummah Salah, is affected by the absence of the Khilafah. It is very central, but we have become secularized, where we think that we are a religion where we just practice rituals and other things don't matter. Islam came as a deen for the whole of humanity, to protect the whole of humanity and to guide the whole of humanity to Jannah. It is not for the Pakistanis or the Arabs or the Africans. It is for the whole of humanity. And it is our duty as Muslims to re-establish the deen and to convey the message to the rest of the world. And this is something we cannot do with the absence of the Khilafah.
Exactly. And I think when we're talking about leadership, and this is where the biggest problem is at this point in time, the Muslim Ummah in a dilemma, because we are leaderless at this point in time. We've got a huge leadership vacuum in the Muslim Ummah, and in the absence of this leadership, in the absence of a Khalif to lead the Muslim Ummah, we are sitting in a situation where we are at this point in time, where we see all these puppet regimes, where we see all these puppet rulers who are subservient to the agenda that is playing out by the West, by the Europeans, and by anybody else who stands against Islam and the Islamic ideology, Brother Mazhar.
No, absolutely. You're absolutely right there, because every now and again we get leaders that we put hopes in, because the Ummah is desperate for change. The Ummah is desperate to look towards somebody to liberate it, or to save it from its predicament. So, I mean, you're old enough. I think you're older than me, and you may remember Gamal Nasser when he came to Egypt. When he was the leader in Egypt, he was so popular, and people actually used to label him as the Arab prophet. And he actually united Syria and Egypt together into an Arab union. And people said he will destroy the Zionist occupation of Palestine. At the time, Hizb ut-Tahrir, Sheikh Taqiyuddin Nabahani said, no, he is a CIA agent. And he was lambasted for saying that. He goes, how can you say that? He said, because look at who is benefiting from his actions. He was there to expel the British influence in Egypt and replace it with the American influence, and that's exactly what happened. And today, if you read the books of former CIA agents, like The Game Player, or the names that games that nations play by Miles Copeland, he says in there clearly that Gamal Nasser was appointed by the CIA in order to keep the British influence out of Egypt. And we saw that with the Suez Crisis. America stood back and supported Gamal Nasser against the British invasion of Egypt. So people put hope in him, but he was there as an agent. And today people talk about Imran Khan, or people talk about Erdogan, or many other rulers. But the point is, their hands are tied because they accept the international order. So Imran Khan can send his troops to kill his brothers in Afghanistan, but Imran Khan cannot send his troops to Kashmir across the border to help the Muslims. Erdogan can send his aid and planes and weapons to Libya and to Kurdistan and to even Azerbaijan, but he wasn't able to topple the weak puppet Bashar al-Assad, because those were the parameters set by the international community for his operation. So we are not going to liberate ourselves from this mess that we are in until we are in charge of our own destiny, with our own ruler, and in charge of our own politics. And this division is keeping the Ummah weak. And this is something that we need to address, and this can only be addressed by Islamic Khilafah leadership, because that is the mechanism Islam provided to resolve disputes. Human beings are always going to disagree, but you need one entity or one role who is embodied with the power to resolve disputes. And this is the case with the Khalifa. So even if you look at the greatest Khulafa of Islam, like Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, radiallahu an, when he became Khalifa, and soon after, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam finished his office on this earth, and there was so much fear that the army of the Muslims had gone to Syria to fight. Medina was under threat of being attacked, and some people were refusing to pay zakat. And Abu Bakr Siddiq got all the Sahaba together and asked them, counsel me, what do you think? And he asked all of them. Even Umar al-Faruq radiallahu an advised Abu Bakr as-Siddiq that we shouldn't declare a second war against the people who don't pay zakat, because we haven't got the capability of doing that. And all the Sahaba said that. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu an got angry. He goes, by Allah, even if they withhold the string they tie the camel with from their zakat, I will fight them. And then he explained to them that zakah and salah are together in the Quran. You cannot separate the two. They are together. If you abandon the salah, it is almost like abandoning Islam. He goes, by Allah, we will fight them. And then he gave them the dalil, and all the Sahaba agreed. So Abu Bakr was on one side, all the Sahaba was on the other side. But because he was the Khalifa, his opinion carried the day. And he actually convinced them, and they agreed with him. And he solved the dispute of zakat. So that's why it's important to have one person who has the authority to resolve disputes. We don't have that, and we will never be able to resolve our disputes.
Well, Brother Mazhar, I know time is of the essence, but what we are planning, inshallah, next week on Tuesday is a complete webinar. In fact, a complete 2-hour webinar to discuss this very important aspect. And hopefully, inshallah, we'll be able to assemble a panel from right across the world to look at this, because I think this is important. This is part of our history, and this is something that we need to know about. We need to arm ourselves with information, with knowledge, and why and how this has actually led to the situation we find ourselves in today. But for now, Jazakallah so much for your time with us here on Salam Media on News and Views. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Mazhar Khan joining us out of the UK this morning, member of Hizb ut-Tahrir. 100 Hijri years since the end of the Uthmani Khilafah.